Welcome back to the Curbsiders. I'm Dr. Matthew Watto, here with my great friend, Dr. Paul Nelson Williams. Paul, how's it going tonight?
It's going great, man. We're not going to comment on the weird Freaky Friday outfit situation that's happening here, and just get
This
right to
is
the teaching.
this is the first time I think, outside of a live show, that I've worn anything other than like a T-shirt on air, probably, or a hoodie.
I don't think I've ever seen you in a necktie. Like I think even when you're gussied up, I think it's a bow tie. So this is really deeply unsettling to me.
Yeah. So, all right, Paul. So, hypercoagulable workup. This was episode number 391 with Dr. Gene Connors, and production done by Nora Toronto and Malini Gandhi. And Paul, let's start up right off. Hypercoagulable workup. What in a history, what might make you think that someone has a family history or predisposition towards clotting?
So it's something I had not previously fully appreciated was how important age is, and I guess it sort of makes sense. But as we talked about in the episode, age is kind of protective against everything. So if a younger patient goes through something that is potentially coagulopathic and has a clot, that's sort of a little bit of a trigger. And the same goes for family members too. So it's specifically first degree relatives that you talk about, and having seemingly unprovoked clots under the age of 50 should at least raise your eyebrows a little bit. And that doesn't necessarily mean you have to test, but it does suggest that there might be some sort of heritable thrombophilic state that you at least need
Right.
to think about a little bit.
Yeah.
And then I guess there's a bunch of other fascinating risk factors. I know there was obesity in particular. I thought that we had talked about a little bit before we got started here.
Yeah, I mean, this just I guess I sort of knew or had heard that obesity was, but she quantified. She said, so obesity, patients with like a BMI above 30, 35, 40, that is as big of a risk factor as someone with heterozygous factor 5 Leidens, which increases your risk of clotting by about 3 times the average population, as does taking an oral contraceptive pill. So like 3 times the risk of the average population. And then these all stack together. So if someone has obesity and heterozygous factor 5 and they're taking an oral contraceptive pill, then their risk is just really high. So you just have to think about um, you have to think about this kind of thing when you're talking to patients who have had a prior clot, or family members with clot. You get and ask about these risk factors. And then the surgeries that she said are pretty strongly provoking, would specifically like the orthopedic surgeries, intra-abdominal surgeries, or neurosurgeries. But if someone has like a clot after like a superficial surgery of any kind, that can be like a little bit suspicious that maybe their threshold is lower because there's some sort of inherited thrombophilia present as well.
Right.
Um,
And just to
and
tie the bow on the clear provoking factors is cancer is obviously, I think, like a number one with a bullet is. So if someone
mhm.
has malignancy, that's especially, I think it's like the mucinous type. That's one that is clearly a provoking factor, and you don't have to go down this rabbit hole of fancy methodologic workup.
Right. So patients, Paul, they always want to be tested when they have a clot. People just want to know, and clinicians seem to love to order these tests. However, I just ask the audience, and I always try to do this with every test I order, is just ask yourself, like, what am I going to do with the results of this? Why am I ordering this testing? Because she made the point that if someone has a provoked clot or an unprovoked clot, like a truly unprovoked clot, the person with the provoked clot, they're going to get treated for the course of that provoked clot. The unprovoked clot, those patients have a good case for indefinite anticoagulation. So it's probably not going to change much for that patient. But Paul, who might it change? Why might it be worth testing?
It's going back to the heritable factor specifically. If you have a patient who has, say, a daughter who's thinking about starting oral contraceptives or is considering pregnancy, as we talked about, as we're starting to stack risk factors, you would want to know if that patient might be passing that on to their progeny and increasing their risk. So
Yeah.
that might be helpful in terms of counseling patients outside of your patients within the family who may benefit from
Right.
further testing to kind of quantify their risk.
So the timing of the testing, she basically said you can test, there's 5 tests. The 5 most common tests you would do would be the prothrombin gene mutation, factor 5 Leiden. Those can be sent anytime because they're genes. The antithrombin 3, protein C, and protein S are very sensitive to what's going on in the body. So you don't want to test those on anticoagulation or when the patient has active cancer, active inflammation. You're just not going to be able to interpret those. So wait until they've completed their course. If they're on a DOAC, like an oral anticoagulant, make sure it's been a couple days or a week or so. they've been off it before you test. And if they're on warfarin, you want to wait longer, 2 weeks or so before you're testing the person. And again, you just need to know what you're going to do with that information. So Paul, the one thing that I thought was really shocking was like what she talked about, how she handles, let's say, someone with a prior clot that was provoked, and now they're going on a plane trip, which is a long plane trip, like 6 hours or more. How she handles that. Did this blow your mind too?
This was wild to me. Yeah, so it's apparently not in the guidelines, though it sounds like Dr. Connors thinks that it should be. At least it seems to be an expert opinion. But for these patients that you're not treating with lifelong anticoagulation, but who sort of declare themselves as someone who might be a little bit thrombophilic, if they're going to be doing something that's high provoking, like a prolonged plane ride, I think longer than 6 hours, I think is the number she said, she
Mhm.
will prescribe them prophylactic anticoagulation or prophylactic DOAC just for the trip and do a little bit of counseling around that. So she may even give someone who travels a lot like 30 pills just so that they can sort of take them for these long plane trips just to reduce the risk of them developing a clot while flying, which it's a concept that makes perfect sense, had never occurred to me. I'd never heard of it being done. So
Yeah.
I don't know.
This is
That's a
why
good
we do the
change.
show, Paul. Great
Yep.
expert opinion like that that you don't hear anywhere else. So I recommend everyone listen to this because we get way into the pathophysiology. We get really into the details of how she does all this and how she makes her decisions. Too much to cover on this short video, but you can check out the link, click the link in the transcription below. And Paul, with all that, this has been another episode of the Curbsiders, bringing you a little knowledge food for your brain hole.
Knowledge food indeed, Matt.
I like that better than yummy, Paul.
It didn't feel good, I'll be honest.
All right. Well, I've been Dr. Matthew Frank Watto.
And I remain Dr. Paul Nelson Williams. Thank you and goodbye.